Let's actually dive into some of the culture wars, though, because the one, especially for me, and that we're doing this on YouTube, that's incredibly important, is the censorship stuff and big tech, and have these companies grown too large. I'm becoming a broken record here, but as a small government guy, I don't really want the government involved yet with the amount of information that Google controls and owns over us and all of these things, and the way they control all the avenues of communication. It's pushing my libertarian beliefs to sort of the end of the road here. Do you view this as a big issue? Is this something you care about? Do you want government involvement, et cetera?
It's a very big issue. I care deeply about it. And then the question we have to figure out is, who do we want making these kinds of decisions? I would suggest that we probably want to have some say ourselves in these decisions, which would suggest that the government be an active decision maker as opposed to just letting big tech platforms make decisions as our proxies. And at this point, even some of the big tech companies are throwing their hands up and saying, we should not be making these decisions.
Do you think they want regulation at this point? But because not only because it's an impossible set of decisions, but also in a weird way that would ultimately hold their monopoly on all of this stuff once the government was involved?
I think that they expect that regulation is inevitable, and they're trying to make it like the most benign version for their interests that it can be.
So what would your strong preference be then? Like, is the government, like, are we talking about breaking up these companies? Do you, like, I always say this, but it's like, I'm in California, I pay my state taxes on a California state website. It looks like Prodigy in 1993. Like, the idea that the government is gonna come in and understand the epic problems. You know, a government regulator is gonna come in and understand the algorithm and the rest of what's going on at YouTube sounds so bananas to me. It's like, I could only see this creating other problems down the road.
So you definitely don't want government controlling it and executing on it. I think you do want government to be able to provide very, very clear rules and guidelines so that everyone knows what really where we all stand. And in terms of where I would stand, I think that we have become overly sensitive to the fact that if someone has an idea that is something I disagree with, that it's somehow going to be harmful to me, to either be exposed to that or to have some sort of contact with that person or organization. So one, I think the government does need to get involved. I think the tech companies at this point are expecting it. And two, if you were to create guidelines, I would want them to be as mindful of the fact that that we live in a country where, you know, free speech is protected and that people need to be able to express different types of viewpoints without feeling like they're going to get cast out of the public forum. So
you would basically sort of treat them like a public utility? That basically everyone should have access to them, and as long as you're not breaking the laws of the United States. Something like that. That's pretty much where I'm at. If I had to go the government route, it's like, if you're not breaking the laws of the United States, I believe everyone should have access to these things. And then if you're selling drugs on them or involved in terrorism or something else. But beyond that, it's like, if you're Steven Crowder and you make a joke, or you're me and you talk to somebody who's shady or whatever, you know what I mean, as an interviewer or whatever, it's like, you have a right to do all of those things. But if you're breaking the direct laws of the United States, then there's something else.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. But, you know, this is one of the struggles. This guy, Jaron Lanier, have you spoken to him? He's one of the internet pioneers.
No.
He said something that really stuck with me. He said that the internet is much better at transmitting negative sentiments and ideas than positive sentiments and ideas.
Have you been on Twitter?
No, sir. And that has very profound repercussions. And so that's one of the reasons why people are struggling so much with this, is that they feel like, in principle, you and I are on the same page. Like, look, as long as you're not breaking the law, like, people should be able to say what they want. But then some of these negative ideas and sentiments and emotions are so viral in such a propulsive way that then, like, in many ways, then, like, the natural reaction is to say, oh, I guess we have to clamp down on that. And then it's like, clamp down on this, that, and then it ends up being a line drawing problem and a slippery slope.
Yeah. So basically, but you're saying you have to suck it up, though, right? Because that's the risk you have to take. You're going to hear some bad stuff.
Yeah, I think there's like a saying, it's like, it's something like, train the child, not the road, is that like we need to make ourselves more resilient, such that if I see an idea that I find antagonistic or offensive, that I don't think that's necessarily something that's criminal.
Yeah, in a weird way, this is sort of personal to your campaign, because you've gotten, as I said to you earlier, I think you get a nice amount of coverage in the online space, and I think because you talk about ideas, and this is where there is fertile ground for that, it's working. But I've seen some of the mainstream things on you where it's like, oh, the trolls of the internet, like Andrew Yang, or the alt-right, or something like that. And it's like, I'm so in this thing that I always know when I see one of these articles. I'm like, if that's what they're saying, then it's obviously not true. But the piece that I would say is true is I think there's the sort of meme makers, the Yang gang on Twitter and all that, they like you, and there's a reason for that. And then the media doesn't know, the mainstream media doesn't know exactly how to relate to that. They can't understand that memes could be being made of this guy who's talking about universal basic income, who isn't promising the world to everybody. So then they sort of have to make it sound like, oh, well, he must be in bed with the evil forces under the internet, or something like that. Yeah,
and I try and say, it's like, do I look like a white nationalist to anyone? It's like, I'm the freaking son of immigrants, and I feel like they, might not welcome me.
Yeah, gay Jew, welcome to the party.
Yeah,
it's like, we're really doing this thing wrong, man.
Yeah, there's something is going to miss. So,
but
it's been surprising to me. The treatment in the mainstream sometimes has just been very confusing to me.
Well, because I've seen once or twice you get asked this question on mainstream things,
yes.
And it's like, and then it automatically makes you defensive, like as if you have some ownership over it. And it's like, that's just why people can't stand mainstream media, I think, at this point.
Yes, I have had that experience, and it's been sometimes difficult to answer the same question over and over again when you're just like, if you've seen any other interview with me in like a similar channel, it's like, why ask me the same question? I'm just going to say the same thing I did there.
yeah, right. We could just press play. You could just be walking around with your iPhone going, well, here's my answer to that one.
Yeah, there's like a fixation on it. And the way I think about it is that people on the internet are actual real human beings who happen to have an internet connection.
Yeah.
And distinguishing between them and other types of citizens just strikes me as bizarre.
Yeah.
It's like people on the internet equals just people.
They're just people. They're not all Russian bots?
Yeah. Well, someone inventoried my social media following, and it came up like 97% human. So it's predominant.
That's got to be the best of the crew that you're involved in.
Yeah. So if you do the same exercise on other politicians' social media followings, you get much lower proportions of humans.
Something like that. I can see you're not trying to throw anyone under the bus here.
Let's just say there are a lot of bots out there for some reason following a lot of these candidates.
Beyond just sort of the gotcha questions of mainstream media, what do you make of the general state of media in general, where it seems like it's just, the short questions, cable news, just the state of our sort of paralysis, and right versus left, and Trump this, and, the focus on sort of all the wrong things.
I did not realize how institutionalized the media companies were until running for president. And a lot of it is the format of a cable news hit, where the most time you're going to have is 5 or 6 minutes typically, and the rhythm is so abbreviated where the odds of you having any kind of genuine intellectual exchange very low, and so you just end up trotting out very similar talking points over and over again, and the interviewers are fixated on certain types of ideas and talking points, so it starts to feel very repetitive. It's one reason why we're screwed,
I'm trying, man. I'm trying to fix it.
It's one reason I'm grateful to be here, and I appreciate this format, because the media institutions are confused somewhat by my campaign, but they're accustomed to this very powerful gatekeeping role that is waning quite quickly. And so we're in an era of institutional collapse.
Yeah. Do you see that across the board? No, really. But I think you're right. We see this across the board. The media gatekeeping collapse, academia for some of the reasons you laid out. I think we see this across the board in many industry. I mean, the retail industry, we could look at this, that all of these things are sort of crumbling, and the gatekeepers are sort of freaking out. And I sympathize with them. I don't want things to burn. There's so many great things in this country. Like, look at us. Like, what an incredible experience this is, you know? And yet, things are changing whether they like it or not. And because they're hanging on so hard or something, that's making it worse.
Yes. And this is one reason why I'm so passionate about universal basic income and the freedom dividend. So we're living through an era of institutional collapse. And when the closer you get to the guts of many of these institutions, like the clearer it gets to you. And so what are we going to do?
Can you give me an example of that, like maybe an academic example? Or just something?
Oh, an academic example. I mean, like, it's very dark where you have all of these people who get PhDs and then they wind up being permanent postdocs and adjuncts, and like they're never going to get paid above a certain level. It's never going to be a tenure track position for them, and so they just wind up being subsistence laborers at these universities